Education 2030 and fostering global citizenship education. It is important to recognize that we have 17 goals of sustainable development. Today, I will discuss why we need global citizenship education and why we need it now, which pertains to the goal 4, or quality of education. What are the enabling requirements for global citizenship education? I think it is very important to clarify what is global citizenship education. And many scholars have asked themselves, is that an abstraction or a framework for action? Without entering into a long discussion of what it is and what it is not, I think we should accept the decision of UNESCO to call it a framework for action. But when you talk about citizenship education and you talk about citizenship, you have to realize that they are bare essentials. In other terms, economic citizenship cannot be accomplished without access to a job, education, medical care, housing, retraining over the lifetime of an individual. These bare essentials, or civic minimums, are a precondition for the establishment of a full citizenship. There are several principles. Here you have them listed in different order, but I think I will just emphasize 2 or 3. First, the respect for human rights. The human rights regime is the model that has been accepted worldwide. The countries of the world have subscribed to it, and with this model we have a basic bedrock of citizenship. But then, of course, planetarian citizenship and sustainability. It is absolutely essential that when we look at citizenship, we look at the planet, which requires a special attention. It's our only home. We have to protect it. And it's essential that we allow the planet to evolve. We have to bring the background into the foreground. There are several agents, the international system, NGOs, social movements, federal governments, local government, regional government, the school system, formal educational systems. All of these could be considered agents in enabling requirements for citizenship. Of course, we have to pay attention to teaching methods. And I would like to say only one element and move on. We need a really cultural sensitive pedagogy, and one that could engage citizenship building with a culture of peace. I will go back to a culture of peace in a few minutes. And finally, at this level of complexity, we do need that the educational systems recognize the importance of global citizenship education. There are several missing links, and those are elements that need to be addressed, and they cannot be ignored, and they must be confronted. The first one is the question of human rights tensions. There are 2 great enemies, if you put it in this term, of global citizenship education. On the one hand, rabid nationalism. On the other hand, religious radicalism. Both of them assume that citizenship can only define in the terms that they define it. That is, as a nationalistic or hyper-nationalistic sense, or in a model of religious radicalism that do not accept any conversation, any dialogue about the principles of the canon. All those 2, in my view, constitute the element that opposes human rights as a universal citizenship. The other element is the tension between social justice, globalism. Globalism is not only globalization, it is a globalization controlled by multinational corporations and countries who try to control the world. Social justice is the attempt to make this world a better world. There is a tremendous tension between globalism and social justice occurring in the context of multiple globalizations today. I emphasize planetarian citizenship, and we need to identify social justice for the planet. I was talking to Paulo Freire in his house in Sao Paulo many years ago, before he passed away. And he said to us and to other friends, Carlos, I should have spoken about the planet in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. There is a missing chapter in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it's eco-pedagogy, how we can use education to protect the environment. Migration continues to be a most important issue of citizenship, and I would like to submit to you that the rights of immigrants are not fully encapsulated in human rights. Of course, we have the knowledge society, and the knowledge society is connected with the network society. One of the elements that articulate global citizenship now is the need to promote a model of knowledge that helps capital accumulation, political legitimation, but at the same time democracy. And that could happen in the context of a network society where everything seems to be interconnected with each other. Therefore, the idea of the traditional 18th, 19th century notion of citizenship as encapsulated within a territory by a nation state is being quickly evaporating. And finally, we have to see the role of education in preventing violent extremism. Those are very serious issues that are inviting us to rethink the same concept of citizenship, and that requires that global citizenship intervenes actively in finding ways to prevent violent extremism. Now, there are tensions, there are contradictions, there are conundrums. The first one is the question of similarities and differences. I don't think this is the moment to begin to discuss exactly how you define global citizenship, but it is certainly connected with terms like global education, civic education, global citizenship education, planetarian citizenship. Some people have argued that global citizenship education is civic education of the 21st century. Maybe so. But the point I'm trying to make is the discussion about terminology is less relevant. The importance here is to defend a framework for action. And here then we have the question of multiple globalizations. In my own work, I have defined several phases of globalization. Just to give you an idea, we have the neoliberal globalization, the dominant top-down model that is impacting the life of all of us, our families, our communities, our nations, our regions, the world altogether. But then, of course, any action has, by implication, and any action has a reaction. So you have the anti-globalization movement. This has been quite active, and we began the century with the first death of the anti-globalization movement in Genoa, when a militant against globalization was killed by the police in Italy, Genoa. Then we have hybrid cultures. If there is a trademark of contemporary globalizations, is this element of diversity, and particularly hybrid cultures, when a number of things that were invented in a particular part or created in a particular part of the world, such as hip-hop in the Bronx more than 70 years ago, now has different expressions of Japanese hip-hop, of Korean hip-hop, Indian hip-hop, etc. Human rights and the human rights regime is another model of globalization, challenging some of the most brutal and violent models of globalization that still exist, and providing a bedrock for a new model of citizenship worldwide. And of course, we have the issue of the war against terrorism and the terrorist model that, in a way, constitute two other phases of globalization. The question of measurement and metrics is a very important question, and it's a great challenge for everything we do in education, more so when we look at citizenship building. How you measure improvements in citizenship building? How you measure the praxis that come out of teaching and learning global citizenship education? This is one of the topics that is beginning to take extraordinary importance in the context of UNESCO and other areas, and it's an area that we are investigating with several colleagues. Of course, we are facing the dilemma of liberal democracies. In one of my books, Education, Democracy, and Multiculturalism, Dilemmas of Citizenship in the Global World, I have identified different stages of understanding the transition from the subject to the king, in which the king has absolute power, to the citizens of the nation state, in which the citizen now emerge with some autonomy, rights and responsibilities. And we are moving now into a model of global citizenship that goes beyond the nation state. Some people argue that the nation state has vanishes or is losing its power, and there is a bit of that, while at the same time globalization will never exist without the presence of nation states. What is the added value of global citizenship education? I already showed the tension with nationalism and with religious fundamentalism. But what I will say is this: we cannot even begin to think about global citizenship unless we know that global citizenship will add value to national, regional, local, community citizenship. And there are multiple citizenships, but the question of adding value is important because a perception that is quite pervasive now is that citizenship has always been a work in progress. In other terms, citizenship has not been fully accomplished. And we are facing all sorts of problems all over the world in terms of creation of citizenship, creation of national unity, even the workings of democracy in the context of capitalism. Therefore, this question of value added is a precondition for global citizenship to take hold. To do that, we have to decouple the human rights regimes or the human rights politics from imperialism. I gave you here several examples: the Gulf War, the former Yugoslavian War, Bosnia, Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro, Rwanda, currently Syria. It is being proven over and over again that genocide takes place in areas in which the dominant power of the war don't have particular interest to defend. And therefore, places like Rwanda, in less than a year, more than 500,000 people were assassinated, murdered by groups, ethnics, who oppose them. And there was virtually no intervention of the main powers. The same discussion about Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia. Partnership with social movements is an option, and an important one, to establish a worldwide model of global citizenship education. Social movements are now becoming transnational, and they're having a much more important presence in the construction of citizenship. But mind you, take into account that there is a citizenship depth of social movements. Social movements have been able to challenge the state, have been able to veto initiatives, but have not yet been able to put forward a unified model of transnational global citizenship that could be endorsed by most progressive social movements. And this could be seen as a new social compact that we can definitely identify in the world. Of course, there are issues that are very difficult to resolve, and global citizenship education may not resolve all of them. For instance, the tension between individual rights and cultural rights. The question of human rights education is a question based on a set of premises which are shared, accepted immediately after the Second World War. But several of those premises contradict long-standing cultural rights traditions, some of them going 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. And there is a tremendous tension, particularly when you look at the question of gender, in which the human rights regime will defend the right of women to be treated as full citizens, and then in some traditions, which I will not name, they are very well known, women are not fully incorporated into the polity. But what can and cannot be reconciled? I personally think that it's very difficult to reconcile the linguistic differences. There are terminology issues in all the different languages which don't have an adequate incorporation vis-a-vis the other language. We have epistemological differences. People are talking about the epistemologies of the North, epistemologies of the South. This is a very important conversation, and my argument has been in more than one of my books that you need to consider these tensions between epistemologies and try to resolve it moving into a social epistemology in which all the questions have been incorporated, particularly the question of post-colonialism. A great deal of the dilemmas of citizenship today has been created by colonialism, its ability to take control and oppress people, nationalities, ethnias, races, tribes, reorganizing the world at their own pleasure and taking advantage of resources that were not theirs. The post-colonial tradition is one of the most important traditions that we need to endorse if we are going to really think of global citizenship education in the ways that is being considered internationally. The religious differences are obviously very different among themselves. The religions are different. Some of them have the same origin, like the Abrahamic traditions, but they keep debating themselves in terms of their principles. There is an attempt, and a very valid one, to create an interfaith dialogue, and dialogue continues to be one of the great topics for global citizenship education. Community ownership differences, of course, because community themselves are fighting to preserve their identities. Then, of course, the differential impacts of the model of the state and welfare regime all over the world. When people talk about the welfare regime or the welfare state, we are not talking about the same model of the state. The Scandinavian states are different than the liberal welfare state, and so on. This may be seen as an academic technicality, but it's not. The way in which the state helps create distribution of resources changes dramatically according to the tradition in which the welfare state is built. And of course, I would like to emphasize the importance of the democratic state. Today, we are living in a moment in which people talk about rigged societies, and there is a very serious criticism of democracy. There is essentially a perception that democracy is not working as it should be, and there are attempts to undermine democracy. These attempts are usually connected with authoritarian perspectives, and I will emphasize that without a democratic state, we cannot have a democracy.